Have him with us again. I will hand over to colleagues in a second, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of the work that we have been doing here at ARU around unlearning. Unlearning is a term that our amazing student race equality advocates came up with, and you have a little bit of an idea of what we're trying to do with unlearning. And it captures there the wording that our advocates, our student advocates came up with, which is the process of identifying an accepted reality that structurally disadvantages its inhabitants some more than others. So that is a kind of underlying piece of work that we've been working on for about 3 years here at ARU. I don't know if anyone recognises the background to that slide. The matrix. Yes, absolutely. I'm going to leave that reference with you to consider in terms of why it might be relevant to the conversations that we're having today. So, just to give you a quick overview, you can see here, this is the piece of work that we've been working on for a couple of years now. And we're really trying to take a staged approach to understanding structural disadvantage. We started really focusing in on structural racism and anti-racism. And we worked with speakers, external speakers and internal speakers in the first stage, which we called the light bulb. And we had Jason come for some of those. And that is the same event that we're running today for everybody in the room and everyone online. We also ran 3 other stages, and we continue to run these stages as well through Unlearning Away days that we ran last year, for example. In our contextualised sessions, we looked at how these kind of issues of structural disadvantage relate to our work and our education processes at Anglia Ruskin. In the Educate session, we worked with our student advocates to develop kind of CPD for our staff and also input for our students on the same themes. And then finally, we have begun the process of diversification and decolonisation at ARU, looking really closely at curriculums and trying to see where we can make improvements to our learning, teaching and assessment processes. So that's a kind of overview to try and situate where this piece of work is coming from. And at this point, I'm going to hand over. And before I do, can I just say a massive thank you to this woman here, Nilima Banerjee, who is our Diversity and Cultural Change Coordinator at ARU within my team. She has worked incredibly hard to get this event off the ground. So before I hand over, a massive thank you to Nilima.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you everyone for being here today and all our online attendees as well. I'm really privileged to work on this work with Katie and the Diversity and Culture Change team at Anglia Ruskin University, and also to host our wonderful speaker, Professor Jason Arday. So as you can see, the format today will include a keynote with Professor Arday, and then we've left quite a lot of space for people both in person and online to ask questions, share reflections, insights and experiences. We really wanted to create a space that felt safe and where everyone felt seen and included. So we really encourage you to share what you want to share today and to ask Professor Arday anything that you would like to ask. So just some housekeeping as we normally have. So this will be recorded and live streamed, and if you are enjoying this and you're watching from home, it will be on our YouTube channel, so tell your friends and family and hopefully they'll watch as well. And just as our starting points, we recognise that racism, sexism and other forms of oppression exist. We encourage everybody to practice empathetic listening and make sure that we consider everybody's contributions, and we all have different starting points and no one's an expert, we're all still on learning. We just do invite you to reflect on your own experiences around race and neurodiversity and hopefully increase your confidence and awareness in talking about structural inequity and to think about your next steps. We do include a trigger warning, and we have reference to lived experience of racism and other forms of structural inequity. If quiet space, and we've got wonderful members of the team, Hannah here in the room, myself and Tyra. We can take you to a quiet space where you can just reflect, and that's absolutely fine. At this point, I'd like to welcome our Vice Chancellor, Professor Roderick Hins, to set the scene and introduce you to our inspirational speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nima. So let me kick off by just thanking Nima and Katie and the whole of the Diversity and Cultural Change team for the work they do. There's not a lot that we do at ARU which I think is more important or personally I take more pride in and more pleasure in than work, very often student-led, but the work we do to try properly to learn to be an inclusive, anti-racist difficult. It's something that I really value, constantly impressed by the work of the team, so thank you very much. So I'm here formally to introduce this afternoon's speaker, Professor Jason Arday. In a minute I'm going to get a piece of paper out of my pocket because his list of kind of accomplishments is so long I couldn't possibly hope to remember it, and I've been briefed. But let me just start off by saying we were really delighted when Jason accepted an honorary Doctor of Education from us, I think last summer, and his speech at the graduation was the most inspiring speech I've heard at graduation. So I've got every confidence that today's talk will be really important to you personally, just like your speech at graduation remains important to me personally. And I hope very much that you will engage, as Nina has suggested, with questions and comments and reflection, because that is the secret of this kind of opportunity, in my opinion. So here comes the job that I've been tasked with doing. Jason Arday is Professor of Sociology of Education at Cambridge University. I'm pretty confident he's the youngest ever person of colour to be appointed professor, probably one of the youngest ever people to be appointed professor of Oxford at the age of 37, which when you learn more about Jason's extraordinary life story is doubly extraordinary. He's previously held professorial positions at the University of Glasgow and at the University of Durham, visiting professor at Ohio State and honorary professor at Durham. He's patron of the Adult Literacy Trust, and Get Further was formerly a trustee of the Runnymede Trust, the UK's leading race equality think tank, for 11 years. Jason is currently a trustee of the British Sociological Association. He sits on the Centre for Labour and Social Studies National Advisory Panel, the NHS Race and Health Observatory Academic Reference Group, and the ITV Cultural Advisory Council. Crowning all those achievements, I hope, is the fact that Professor Jason Arday was awarded an honorary Doctorate of Education by Anglo-Ruskin University in 2024. Please join me in welcoming a genuine, true friend of Anglo-Ruskin University, Jason.
Thank you so much, Roderick. That's really kind of you. Nilima, thank you. First and foremost, how's everyone keeping? Everyone well? Everyone online okay? Well, I wouldn't know. I mean, just, but the most important thing is that I hope you're all okay. One of the things that's always really interesting, as I said, is talking with people, not at people. So I'm literally going to talk for no more than 20 minutes and use the clock in my head to know when to wrap up. The easiest thing I think is always a good instrument is finding a common ground. So the common ground that I think is always useful is music. I can use sports references because in a previous life I was a PE teacher, but sport can be quite isolating. But sport, the arts, is something that everyone can always feel a sense of engagement with. So to amuse myself, if nothing else, I've got a set list, which Nalim has kindly written out for me, and it's stuck to the ground. And I'm going to go through this set list, and that's going to be my methodology. So there's no theories. As someone once said to me, they're giving professorships out to anyone. So, so this is a good example of it, so I'm proud of that. Part of what I want to kind of discuss today really is this idea of belonging. And I guess within the neurodivergent context or neurodivergence, what that actually means. But for me, it's very hard to kind of talk about this in kind of set, cement ways. It's more a way of thinking. There's a fluidity to it. And that fluidity, I think, is best exercised really through action. But part of that is finding a connective element. It's finding a connective element. And really the idea of how we see human beings. Now, the one thing that I always think about with academia, if I'm being absolutely honest, I knew this when I came into academia in 2012 because I surmised it pretty quickly. It's a very unkind space. So that's the first thing that I learned. It's a very unkind space. And, you know, being unkind in academia is handsomely rewarded, actually. Being selfish, being vain, being individualistic, you know, being exploitative, those things can be handsomely rewarded. So the first thing I thought when I came into academia, as they say in life, never meet your heroes. You meet people that you look up to and you think, oh my God, how disappointing. How disappointing, right? So the first thing is you want to reject that. Then you kind of think, you look at the kind of general landscape and you think, how come certain people occupy certain positions? And then you realise the whole thing is predicated on this idea of exclusion. So if we look across the intersect and we think about, you know, class, gender, sexuality, religion, race, disability, all of those things sought to exclude individuals from this space. And one of the things that I thought was, okay, I'm not going to be the best academic in the world, but what I am going to focus on is thinking about how I can become one of the most inclusive academics in the world. Not by papers or books, but by thinking. Because as my dad kind of mentioned to me very vehemently in 2012, Jason, you can't be buried with your books. Remember, it's about how you made people feel. Now, he lifted that from Maya Angelou, the last bit. But he is right, you can't be buried with your books and papers. So the thing that was actually more important than that is this idea of what do my actions say? Now, the biggest thing I kind of thought about in terms of academia that was really noticeable, the absence of it in comparison to being a school teacher, was praxis. So this idea of theory and this idea of praxis, these two things merge together and boom, you have this magical thing that happens where your words actually meet your actions. Go figure, right? So in academia, what I found, particularly in my line of work in the social sciences, was that people theorize a lot about ideas, but there wasn't actually a lot of action to support those ideas. And moreover, they didn't work very well with stakeholders in terms of professional service staff or community activists or community stakeholders to kind of merge those two ideas together. Okay, so there was an exclusionary part of that. And I guess part of this is kind of thinking through what are some of the tenets we can use to do this. Okay, so like I said, people come up with lots of theories and some of them work, some of them don't work. So I'm just going to use a tried and tested theory, music. Everyone likes music, so I feel like, you know, we're going to go okay with that. So the first thing I'm going to start with is a nice toe tapper to begin with by Belinda Carlisle. We want the same thing. Okay, when we think about inclusive spaces and we think about neurodivergence and when we think about equality generally speaking, what everybody's asking for is this ability to be seen. This ability to be seen, and it's in the minutiae, it's in the simple things in terms of how we see people. Something as simple as asking someone how their day has been. Something as simple as how you greet someone. Something as simple as moving away from the transactional element of, you look lovely by the way, moving away from the transactional element of how we engage with people. Okay, so that becomes a really important thing, and this idea of wanting the same thing is what is the thing we all value? What is the thing we all value? Right? There's no kind of, you know, archaic kind of convoluted questions here. It's what is the thing we all value? I would say one of the simple things human beings value is this sense of belonging, being seen. It's a simple thing, but for some reason it's hard for us to exercise in these spaces. But fundamentally, everyone wants the same thing. I'm yet to meet someone who doesn't want to be valued or nurtured or supported. Now, when we think across the intersect and we think about how people are excluded from those spaces, that becomes quite an interesting thing, because then exclusion or inclusion becomes a membership. In other words, you pay a subscription. Now, who are the arbiters of this subscription? Who decides what these rules are in terms of who is allowed to belong and who isn't allowed to belong? So a big part of this is how we reject these ideas. How do we reject these forms of exclusion? How do we reject them? For me, it comes down to small acts of change. spheres of influence. What can you do within your own sphere of influence to reject that? Because the one thing that I always hold on to is it's not about getting there, it's about the way you do it. It's about the way you do it. And also, one of my really close friends always says to me, or her partner once said to her, the softer advice is given, the harder it lands. Now that becomes a really important thing. The softer advice is given, the harder it lands. If you take a hammer to a nail, people don't always respond to that. Okay, so it's kind of us interrogating ourselves in terms of we all want the same thing, but who has membership to that? Who is allowed access to wanting this same thing? Okay, so now we'll go on to Marvin Gaye, problematic individual, but just humour me. Okay, so Marvin Gaye went through many phases. Okay, So he was a smooth kind of R&B. I wouldn't say crooner, but he was smooth. Let's just say he was smooth. Okay, obviously. The second phase of his career, where he really fell out with Berry Gordy, was he wanted to become an activist. And in particular, his interests were climate change and human beings, war. And those were his two big interests towards the kind of second half of his career, okay? So, you've got Too Busy Thinking About My Baby, Marvin Gaye, and then you've got What's Going On, Marvin Gaye. They're two completely different people, okay? And what's going on is a really important question right now in terms of where we are in higher education. What is going on? What is going on? Good people are finding themselves in this permanent state of precarity. The intersection has become even more spliced than it already was. And that splicing is consequential because it does exacerbate issues around wellness, mental health, job security, and a sense of feeling like you belong in a place. If you're always in this state of permanent precariousness, you don't feel a sense of belonging. If anything, you feel trepidation. The thing you're more likely to have is cabin fever. Let me have this tab open and then have this tab open and start looking for jobs. That's what you're going to do, and it is a really difficult situation to be in. But part of that what's going on is us asking ourselves, what do we want higher education to look like? I can't remember what I was doing, but maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, I was listening to someone speak, and they were talking really disparagingly about their colleagues in terms of their level of competence. And this was ableist, and it was racialized. And I was listening to this individual, just listening to them. And afterwards I said to them, I let them have their bit, and I thought, do this in a dignified way. So I didn't do it in front of people. I waited and I spoke to the individual afterwards. And the simple question I asked him is this what you are? Is this what you are? Is this what you are? Is this what you want people to think of you? Is this what you are? And they was like, what do you mean? I was like, is this what you are? This is what you are. This is how you choose to talk about people. This is how you choose to represent yourself. Because all that tells me about you is that you are a painfully insecure person, if this is what you've got to say about another individual. And it was quite remarkable because the effort they went into with this character assassination in terms of talking about their level of competence, really inferring that the only reason that they were sort of in that position was around kind of positive action, really. And what I explained to them is that positive action is there for us to all benefit from and utilise to create a greater sense of equity. And yeah, my question was, is this what you are? Is this what you are? And I finished and I didn't really give them a chance to reply. I just kind of said, I said, you're better than this. You're better than this. Is this what you want people to think of you? You're better than this. And it's that whole thing I always ask myself. I don't necessarily ask of other people. I did on this particular occasion. But it's that whole thing of, Jason, is this what you are? Is this what you are? Is this what you are? Because the first person I'm going to point the finger at is myself. So is this what you want to be? Is this how you want to represent yourself and other people? If you've been placed in a fortuitous place to be able to represent the voices of people, think about what it is you're saying. What is going on in the world? How do things affect people? From this kind of plinth that I am fortunate enough to stand on now, it's quite amazing if you don't engage in it as a conscious act, how far removed you can become from the plight of people in an everyday situation. You can really extricate yourself. It takes a real level of self-awareness and consciousness, not that I have it figured out, but to really be mindful of Who is allowed to belong in these spaces? What is going on? Why are people so upset and emotionally drained in higher education at the moment? Higher education is a microcosm of the world in many respects, and it's reflective of what's going on in society. What's happening in society is not great at the moment, environmentally, culturally. It's not great politically, economically, it's not great. And so invariably, people do take that into work. And across the intersection, that does impact people's experiences. And it's acutely felt in some respects, with people who are neurodivergent, who are kind of forever oscillating in a neurotypical world. The thing that's really important, Jason's got 10 minutes, is being together. Being together. Collectivism is our greatest instrument. It sounds like a Labour pledge, so I don't mean it to sound like this. It's actually a song choice that Katie chose for me. Better Together. I'm pretty sure Labour has said that somewhere. But Jack Johnson's Better Together. Now, for me, it is important that we're together. Remember what I said at the very beginning. You know, higher education has historically thrived on, in many respects, individualism, individualistic endeavour that doesn't always embrace and think about the collective. Now, the collective is the most important thing. The collective is the most important thing. This idea of twitching fingers never works. I've never seen it work. I've never seen a finger penetrate a wall. But what I have seen is a collective fist penetrate a wall. I have seen that. I've seen it many, many times, and we have so many examples throughout history of how that has worked and captivated the imagination of people who have a desire for everybody to be free. Now, what does being free in the workplace look like? I can reduce it to neurodiversity, but actually it's in our best interest to look broader outside of that context. And just generally speaking, who is allowed to come to work and be free? How do you create these kind of cultures where people feel better together, people feel a part of something? Feeling a part of something is so, so important. It's tribal. In some respects, it can be ritualistic. It can be adversarial, but feeling a part of something becomes hugely, hugely important, particularly in a society where people are feeling more and more increasingly isolated. I don't know why I put this one in, but it's for my amusement, but there will be a point somewhere. Okay, so dancing in the dark, okay? Now, in some respects in higher education at the moment, we are dancing in the dark, okay? So to quote Springsteen, we are dancing in the dark. I don't think from one day to the next, I don't have that gift, nor does anyone else, of being able to predict what tomorrow has or what comes tomorrow, okay? So we are dancing dark in terms of the kind of turbulence of higher education and the academy at the moment. But in some respects, my belief in human beings has never wavered. And I guess sadly for me, I'm 40 next month. And one of the things that I kind of think about is that I have managed to keep somehow this fluorescent adolescence in terms of my belief in human beings. My belief in human beings has never wavered. I still believe human beings are capable of great things. And I still have this strong sense that human beings, when given the right type of fire, can create that spark. And all you need is an ember. All you need is an ember. You know, you're in the woods, you're trying to start a fire. All you need is a little flicker of an ember for the whole thing to come ablaze. That's all you need. And I always have this belief that you've got one individual, if not many, that are capable of doing that. And that is a very important thing for all of us to hold on to. It's only a spark. It only takes one thing for something to get going in the right direction. But the decision that we all have is, are we the people, or am I going to be the person who's going to take responsibility for that spark? Because it takes courage to put yourself in a position where you're like, okay, I'm going to lead that particular charge. It's a difficult thing, particularly when you think of the rearguard action that we have in society in terms of general societal inequality. You know, there are a lot of people who are invested in people's downfall. It's quite remarkable. It's quite remarkable how kind of voyeuristic we are as a society in terms of, you know, investing in people's downfall, how invested we are in it. And part of it in higher education is that we need to be mindful of the reasons we're all here. We're all here. That spark becomes hugely important in terms of how we think about things and how we disrupt that investment in people's downfall. because actually higher education is a collective. It's in every institution's best interest to work civically and work collectively to achieve a greater goal, which is to prepare people to not only take their place in the labour market, which is a very pragmatic view, but to prepare people to take their place and navigate life in a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-intersectional society. Tracy Chapman's self-titled album, which came out in 1989, I believe, which was Tracy Chapman, that was the name of the album, one of the classic albums. Okay? If I was to think of the vanguard of albums that really grabbed my attention, particularly by black women, but if, you know, my top 5 favourite albums is Tracy Chapman's self-titled album and Lauryn Hill's Miseducation. It could have been any one of those two, but for the purpose of this, I'm going to choose Tracy Chapman. Okay, and Tracy Chapman, there's a song in there called If Not Now, Then When? And the time is now. Okay, I just think I could have used Moloko as well, but the time is actually now. The time is now. The time is now for people to really hit free. Hit free. One of the things that I always think about, I love sport. As I said, I was a PE teacher in a previous life, and I love tennis. So I love football is my main sport, but I love tennis. And there's always this argument about the GOAT, who is the greatest tennis player ever? Now it depends really what you're into. Okay, if you go by numbers, it's Novak Djokovic, okay, in terms of numbers. If you go by battling qualities, arguably it's Nadal. If you go by just pure aesthetic and balletic effort and hitting free, it's Federer. Now for me, the aesthetics of it is really important to me. Now the reason why I would choose Federer as the greatest is because he is able to hit free. He's able to be aggressive and he's always able to take a forward step. In academia, in society, in this space, in terms of now, if not now then when, now, everybody has to step inside the tee. Everybody has to step inside the baseline and everybody has to hit free. And when I say hit free, I mean go for your winners. Go for your winners. Sometimes it's about being in that meeting and having a really difficult conversation or making a difficult point. But what you have to think to yourself is, what is easier to stomach? Do I become constipated on this point that I really want to make? Is that an easier thing for me to succumb to? Or do I just hit free and say it? Of course, you don't do it with reckless abandon, but you say it in a really cultured and curated way. And that is a really, really important thing to get forward. Because actually, there's that expression of what happens when they say good men do nothing, but when good people don't say anything or don't do anything. But there is also a privilege to being able to say what you want, when you want. And that's something that I would do well to recognise more often. Sometimes I think to myself, the great thing with hurling abuse at the TV, doesn't answer back. It's great, right? And you're hurling abuse at the TV, why don't you say, why don't you? And you think to yourself, it's easy to hurl abuse at the TV. It's easy to think that when you're in someone's company at work, you're like, why didn't you say that? It's a high wire act, you know, and the dance of it, in of itself, is actually really difficult because there are certain people who are in a privileged position to be able to say things. There are certain people who are not. Their position is much more precarious, is much more consequential for those individuals to say things, particularly people on the periphery. So people of colour, individuals with disability, people from lower class backgrounds or working class backgrounds, etc., etc. They don't have the same type of agency, and that agency becomes really important. So really it's incumbent on those who do have agency to create those spaces for everybody to have a voice and to be able to, I don't really like this term, but my 18-year-old daughter uses it a lot and everyone else, speak their truth, okay? And that is important. It's really important. But I think I don't like it because I'm getting old, but that's why. But it's a good point, okay? That ability for everyone to speak their truth. And the most important thing, if you remember nothing else from this spiel, which I've taken 17 minutes of your life that you'll never get back, is I really, 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 really love Lenny Kravitz a lot. In fact, that's probably the sole reason I have dreadlocks, because I wanted to look like him when I was a kid. And Lenny Kravitz has a beautiful body of work, okay? And having seen Lenny Kravitz probably over 20 times, in fact, I saw him last month, 2 months ago, at Wembley Arena. The final song he always does, or the penultimate song he always does, which is like literally a 15-minute dragged out set. So if you've been to Bruce Springsteen before and you've ever seen Bruce Springsteen and E Street Band play, every song is 15 minutes, right? This particular song of Lenny Kravitz is a long one, as in he drags it out with a band, orchestra, all these kind of things. And it's called Let Love Rule. Okay, now, the reason why that becomes really important is because in these spaces at the moment, what we are bereft of is care. And one of the things that I always talk about is this politics of care. What does this politics of care look like? Is it an ethical thing, or is it a moral obligation? I don't have all the answers, not really for me to decide what that looks like. But what is important is thinking about how can we infuse love, compassion, empathy, and care in everything we do. Because if ever there was a time we needed it, now is the time. Now is the time. People are going into work, and very often, they're not thriving at work, they're surviving work. They're surviving work. And I don't think you need me to tell you that that is no existence. That is no existence. And actually, the more people I've come across in these situations, the more people are straddling a myriad of problems. A myriad of problems. And I always believe to look at someone, you never know. You never know. I'm going to tell you a story, and it's quite a sad story, but it's just to kind of make the point, okay? Now, I got to think how I tell this story. I was in Liverpool Street, ironically, which is where I come from today, and I went and met a friend. Let's just say at a place. I don't want to name what the place was. And this individual was sitting there, was absolutely fine, was absolutely happy. And yeah, absolutely fine. The individual finished their meal and walked on to a mezzanine, and that was it. That was it. And, you know, the individual was in my eye line when he was eating, and if someone had said to me, just look at that individual, if I could have predicted, as I said 5 minutes ago, I don't have that gift of knowing what's in another person's mind, but if I could have predicted what that individual was going to do 10 minutes later, you would have intervened in some way. Everyone would have done. Now, I didn't need that to be a lesson, but what it did reiterate to me is that never make the presumption that somebody is okay. Never make the presumption. Always go that extra mile to ask someone, how are you doing? Are you okay? Particularly people you work with. Because the amount of masking people do at work, never mind neurodivergence, generally speaking, the amount of masking people do emotionally at work is insane. And it's kind of the difference sometimes between somebody making a decision where they feel on their own and the decision where actually they think, even for 5 minutes today, I was a part of something. I was a part of a conversation where someone asked me how I was doing. That letting love rule bit becomes really, really, really important. I'm going to finish on this, and this one's for Nalima. The most important, someone wants, this is, I mean, look, Nalima and I both love Sade, so this is great. Everyone loves Sade here? Right, okay, so, but I remember a few years ago, I was going through a tough time, and quite good at keeping face, so no one could really tell that I was going through a tough time. And I remember someone saying to me, you know, there wasn't much anyone could really say to break that chain of thought in terms of what I was thinking at the time. And in particular, I was talking to these two people about this. And, you know, the thing that they kind of both said in unison is that, Jason, like, you know, totally understand, like, you know, we're by your side, we'll support you. And, you know, they wouldn't necessarily know how far that went. That was enough to just get you through the day. And those two people were Katie Potts, aka KP, and Linda Brown. Now, it's not like it was a throwaway statement, but it was just, it was said with the absolute authenticity and genuine disposition that they always both have. But it was enough to just get me through that day. And then tomorrow, you try and attack free again. Because when you're hitting unforced errors into the net, at some point you try and go a bit conservative and you start playing baseline tennis and going 50-stroke rallies, when actually what you want to do is step inside and you want to attack the let. You want to finish points in, you know, big first serve, 1-2 punch. Big first serve, come in that net, kill the point. You don't want to be doing 20 2 30-shot rallies with life. You don't want to be doing that. In the same way I tell people, you want to get life out of there with a one-hitter quitter. You don't want to be doing 12 rounds with life. You'll end up punch drunk like me. So, I want to finish on this, and this is quite an important thing to me, because you don't know if you get opportunities to do these things again, and it's really just to say a massive thank you to everyone. So, last year, I was very fortunate to attend an ARU graduation, and my mentor, my best friend Sandro came, and a really close friend of mine, Professor Tina Ramnakawan, came as well. And you're sat on the stage, and you're looking at all these amazing students, and I'm sat there thinking, this is quite a surreal thing. So you're thinking of all these different things that are going through your mind. I'm thinking about the first time I met Julian Priddle. I'm thinking about the first time I met Katie Potts. I'm thinking about the first time I met Linda Brown. I'm thinking about all these things. I'm thinking about the tens, I don't know, it must be something close to 90, 80 hours we spent on Zoom over a period of like a couple of years, trying to kind of talk through what the direction and navigational focus would be for ARU's race equality charter submission, and the kind of interventions that they would have in place to mobilise greater race equality. And you sat there thinking like how lucky you were to be a part of it. And at the time, when you're doing it, you don't really think there's going to be an end. You just think it'll go on forever, because it wasn't. We had so much fun. We had so much fun, and I remember thinking my golden rule is, for all the things I've just said, don't make friends at work. Treat work, be really pragmatic about work. And it was probably the first time, bar maybe 2 occasions before that, that I'd actually made friends at work, and you feel a part of something. And so you're sat there, and I remember John did the most beautiful citation, and you're looking down because you're like, oh, I can feel it, it's coming up, it's coming up, and you're trying to put it down. And I'm not really a big crier, but on that particular day, I was like, I can feel it. And I'm trying really hard. I was pinching my leg, I was pulling hair out of my arms, I was doing everything to try and distract myself. And I thought to myself, you know, Jason, this is so surreal. These students and all these people have all come here today to see their wonderful people be celebrated, and you're a small part of it. After John had read this citation, I then got up and I met Roderick, and I was crying by this point. It was really, really difficult, and Roderick was like, take your time, it's okay, don't worry. And those little moments, they go such a long way, because what was stood in front of me wasn't the VC, it was a friend. And as I looked to the other side of him, I could see Linda, and KP was watching on a screen at home, and it was mad. The whole thing was just mad. And I remember it was this standing ovation, and people wouldn't stop for ages. And the reason why I'm telling you this story is because someone asked me probably about a month ago, what is the best moment you've had in your career? It was an interview I did for something, and I said that because in that moment, I remember thinking I was a small part of something, but really the moment was for Linda, it was for KP, and it was for Julian, because everything they had done to mobilise change in this space, I remember thinking that I'm the one that's fortunate here to pick up an honorary doctorate, but really it's for their collective efforts towards moving this charge. So all of that is to say is that, and I don't say this lightly, but if someone asked me what are the 3 happiest days of your life, you know, including my kids being born, I would put that up there, because you can't see it from my point of view, but it was like the most surreal thing you could ever wish to see. And it wasn't the first one that I'd got, but it was probably the one that meant the most, because it was with friends. That whole reason I was stood there in the first place was because of those 3 people. So just want to say thank you so much for everything. Sometimes you think that hopefully there'll be a next time, but if there isn't, I just want to say that day will love me for the rest of my life, and I have all of you to thank for that. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jason, for that absolutely amazing and insightful invite from Keynote. It's such a privilege and an honour to welcome you back into this space.
Oh, nice.
You are amongst friends.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
As Jason, and we work very closely with lots of people who have been working on this, and we wanted to make sure that this was a space that felt truly interactive, truly a space where people could feel seen and included. So now we're going to open up the space to people here in the room and people online to share their questions, their comments, their insights and their feedback. And I'm going to be assisted by my colleagues, Tyra and Alvina, who are going to help me. So if you do want to make a contribution, ask a question, if you can stick your hand up. And I've also got my colleagues to help me with the online questions as well. And Jason obviously is here. So please feel free to ask Jason anything that you would like to ask. So I open the floor to you and also to the online people, and thank you so much all of you for coming to Unlearn with us today.
Stunned to boredom.
Jason, thanks so much. That was fantastic. I was just so struck by where you started, saying that unkindness is such a strong feature of universities, and that unkindness is rewarded. I mean, that's just such a great challenge to throw out. So thank you for that. Where I worry, I think most about kindness is not so much the interaction between colleagues, and I'm sure that's just because I'm misguided, but I think we can and should really aim to demonstrate that to each other at every level. But the interactions with students, especially in a large university with large numbers of students, and all the constraints on really building properly attentive kind of relationships. And I wondered what thoughts you had about how, a lecturer with a large cohort of students, say 50 or so, how might they best try and show kindness to students in a way that you think would help establish confidence and inclusion?
That's a great question. That's a really great question. I'll start off with a short parable. Once I watched this video, and there was this researcher who did research on the thing I'm about to tell you. And he said, what do you think is the highest frequency people respond to? So people put their hand up and they were like, care, empathy, compassion. He was like, no, there's all great things, but that's not the thing. That's not the highest frequency people respond to. So the highest frequency people respond to is authenticity. And the question I would ask, because I think something that kindness radiates from this, is how authentic are people in those spaces? Now, there's lots of reasons why a lecturer or even someone in professional services can't be as authentic as they want to be in a place, in a workplace, or as vulnerable as they want to be, because there are parameters around that. Again, who is allowed to be authentically themselves in a workplace? But I would say that, is it possible to learn 100 names in a lecture hall? Maybe not. I've got a good memory, so I think I could. But that's not a realistic thing to ask of everyone. But what is a realistic thing to be able to do is to have that vulnerability. And I think that vulnerability works from the most simple but the most important premise I think an individual should have, and that's humility. And that is something that isn't necessarily associated with academia. In fact, it's not associated with academia. So if somebody is humble in that space and students can see themselves, it's the idea that you are attainable to students. Students look at you and you could be them. If you can eliminate that idea of hierarchy, the one thing I always say to students is, you're here and I'm here, and my job, hopefully, at the end of this journey is to earn your respect and be able to at least give you a heel tap. That's the most important thing. It always comes down to, where do we situate students? Do we either situate them as the business, or do we situate them as friends? And we're friends in arms, all trying to learn together. And really, my job, or our job, then becomes facilitatory. We're facilitating, we're a conduit to learning. We're not the orators of learning. And I really believe that, because the truth is, I'll be honest, when I go into most lecture rooms throughout my career, most of the students, if not all of them, are more intelligent than I am. I know a lot about a very small area. So I go into that space with the humility of that. recognising that this is a great opportunity for me to learn, steal, come here and pretend like I know it. That's really my job. So it's that humility in those spaces. And on a serious note, that authenticity and that ability to be humble, it's not an ability, it's a way of living actually, but that ability to be humble and that vulnerability in those spaces, it humanises you. And if there's one thing that I think sometimes academics struggle to do, is to be human in front of people. And look, there are a lot of very legitimate reasons as to why. Because it can be seen as weakness and it can be pounced upon and exploited. So there are real legitimate reasons as to why academics sometimes behave like that, and people in professional services sometimes can behave like that as well. But it comes down to the cultures that we're creating, and if we create better cultures, then hopefully people don't have to have that armour and behave in those ways, which can sometimes be quite exclusionary and just really difficult.
Thank you. We'll go to Katie, who I think's got an online question. Thank you.
Yes, I do. So there's lots of really interesting things coming in the chat, lots of kind of love for the references, the music references. And I've got a question here from Nick Collinette. Question relating to Marvin Gaye's song, What's Going on this so-called Liberation Day coined by Trump. How can UK HEIs rally against the anti-EDI landscape in the wider world?
Oh, well, that's a good, great question, Nick. It's very difficult. It's very, very difficult. Like, I'm very, very, very fortunate that I get asked to do things like this. And the one thing that people want you to often provide is this kind of elixir for hope. But I try not to speak with false tongue. And it's very hard to be hopeful in these times because the pushback, the current, the torrent that we're against is so strong. But, and there is a but, you don't necessarily need an ocean full of hope, but you do need a ripple, you do need a drop, and that is often enough. That is often enough to give people a semblance that things can still change. You still have like-minded people who are fighting against, what has become a really dominant zeitgeist in terms of the actions of people like Trump, Musk, etc., etc. But I think the most important thing is, again, that influence of change. So within your influence of change, what can you change? And the hope is that collectively others are doing the same thing in their small spheres of influence. That, in my opinion, is how you create a mighty ocean. That whole idea of tiny drops making a mighty ocean, that is how you do it. Has it become more difficult in these turbulent times? Yes, but it's, sometimes I think to myself, do I need a lot of hope? Ideally, I'd like a lot of hope, but actually it's enough. It's enough just to even be on a lifeline of hope, as in he's got a 1% or she or they have got a 1% chance, and that 1% chance is enough to convert anything. I think it can be converted into just about anything. So it's about how we hold on to that. I think energy, we all have a finite amount of energy, and it depends where we invest our energy. Someone like Trump is overbearing, all-encompassing, and it's amazing how much energy you can give to an individual like that. I do it every day, but it's thinking about what we do with that finite energy, and actually a better use of that energy, potentially, is to focus on that small sphere of influence that we can change, and hopefully through our actions, encourage or inspire people to engage in those kind of changes of practice, or to quote Scorpion, wings of change.
Fantastic. Have you got anyone in the room? Linda?
I'm not sure how to word this, Jason, but can you give us a song for the aspiration of HE in your
in my head jukebox. No. Do you know what I would use, which is funny enough, the talk I'm going to do tomorrow? A song by Go West, King of Wishful Thinking. And I think part of our space in HE is to keep thinking wishfully in terms of what do we want it to be, and though at times it may seem unattainable, continue to work towards that. So it's this idea of what is the best case scenario for higher education? What is the best case scenario for all stakeholders in higher education? That these spaces are inclusive, that these spaces are diverse, that these spaces create and cultivate a sense of belonging. And I think it's a thing for us all to aspire to and continue to work to. So I would say my thinking is always wishful. Am I the king of wishful thinking? I don't think I am. I think I'm the prince of wishful thinking, and someone who thinks more optimistically than I do. But it's that idea of eternal optimism and eternal hope. And the thing with eternal optimism and hope, one could argue it's situated in naivety, but I think that's not a bad thing. And that's what I kind of made a point about fluorescent adolescence, that the naivety of a child is quite an amazing thing. It's only now, Noah, my 10-year-old mad dog, he's just stopped believing I can pull a pound behind his ear. He's only just stopped believing I can do that. I mean, I think he's known for a while, but it's the fact he always gets the pound, which he's more interested in. But actually, that fluorescent adolescence, it is a good thing, because the truth is, I still do, if someone pulled a pound from behind my ear, I'd still be like, oh my God. Like, in the same way, if somebody did a small act in this space, I would still be massively amazed by it, because it's still, to me, the greatest magic trick to make people feel something, to make people feel a sense of belonging in a place. It's the greatest magic trick ever. So if anyone is able to do that, metaphorically pulling a pound or 5p behind someone's ear, I think that is really, really important, because believe me, people will be amazed by it, because it rarely happens in these spaces, because these spaces are predicated on exclusion, unfortunately. And part of what we need to do is have that civic idea around how we embody in ourselves and how we engage in acts of inclusivity.
Wow, thank you so much. Do we have another online question? Just wanted to give you the line. Thank you. Thank you, Katie.
I was just saying that we have lots of real positive comments coming in, and lots of people kind of agreeing with the points that we're making around authenticity in particular. But no questions at this point. People who are online, feel free to throw in some questions to the chat.
Thank you, Katie.
We've had up to about 150 people.
Wow. I've got a question, if I'm going to indulge myself. So in your wonderful keynote, you talked about speaking your truth and doing the dance. And as someone who has an intersecting identity as a disabled urban majority woman from a lower socioeconomic background who emigrated to this country, is how do you do that dance, and how do you keep your resilience?
Great question, Lima. In terms of the dance, it's a high wire act, so you're always going to be on that, on that thin line, kind of precariously balancing all the time. But I think a big part of it is, this is actually my alarm and one of my favourite songs, but it works. It's a song by Pearl Jam called Even Flow, and it's about how someone finds even flow. How do you find even flow in those spaces? So, for example, having to navigate and straddle all of those different things, what is the thing that brings you into a state of flow? Where do you feel most calm? And obviously, me sitting on a couch watching Home and Away Neighbours is where I feel most calm. But in the context of work, how do you get that state of flow? They say in sport, a state of flow in sport, so if you take someone like Dan Carter, who is a fly half for the All Blacks, when he was in a state of flow, everything went from being this small picture to this big picture. He could see everything in front of him. So he was a playmaker, could see everything in front of him. And so when you're in that state of flow in a workplace, or just when you're navigating those varying intersects, there will always be at least one point in your life where you felt, actually, I'm in this state of flow. I can see it all in front of me. I can see the punch coming. I can slip. I can move out of the way. I can navigate all of these things, and I can do it quite seamlessly well. So there's always that state of flow, and it's about asking yourself and finding out, where have I found that state of flow? Where have I found that peace of mind? Now, I don't want to talk like I have all the answers, because I certainly don't, and I haven't got life figured out. But that state of flow is quite an interesting thing to kind of not buy into, but to really engage with. Where have I felt, where me, Neil Lima, where have I felt most as though I was in a state of flow? I was in control of the situation. I was in control, as much as one can be, or I was able to cultivate safety in really hostile terrain. When I did that, I would have been in some state of flow. When was the time I did that? And can I replicate it, or can I engage with that feeling again? Again, I don't speak from the position of knowing everything, but that would probably be my musings in terms of when I feel in a state of flow, I hit free. I hit free, and I know what I'm like, because in my head I'm always thinking in my head the same thing. I'm like, right, block parties, the prayer, like God give me grace and dancing feet. I'm always thinking, be free, don't be encumbered, don't be bogged down, be free. And it's that whole idea of how do you do it. It looks very different to me than what it will look for you or for anyone else in here, but it's finding that state of what do I feel like when I'm in flow. And it's difficult to say for you without being you, but you will know that, and it's kind of something to try and tap into.
Amazing.
Oh,
Thank
you're
you.
welcome. No worries.
Do we have another question here? Yes, thank you.
Hello, I know you're mostly talking about higher education, but I work in additional needs college and school. Some of our students have not got the voice to be able to advocate for themselves, and I was wondering how you think people could reconcile being an ally and not speaking for those individuals. When you say that we should be a collective, some of those people can't actually join in the collective.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, being an advocate or an ally without taking up space, yeah? I think that's a great question. It's one of my favourite proverbs, but there's an Islamic proverb, and it says that your right hand shouldn't show what your left hand is doing. And my whole thing with advocating for people, or engaging in acts of charity, or engaging in acts of allyship, is not the thing. You don't speak about it, you just do it. You just do it. It's not, I think all too often, people engage in allyship, and rather than maybe sit in the back seat, they still want to be a front seat driver. It kind of defeats the whole purpose of allyship. Your job is to either be behind a camera and be quiet, or sit in the back seat, put your seatbelt on, and nod your head to the music, but I don't want to hear a word out of you. Yeah. So that for me is that's the way it should be done. When I see people, engage in allyship and be like, when I see that, I recoil. To me, it's almost grotesque. It's like I've seen the worst. Because the act of engaging in allyship is that it's not to be seen. And if you think about how people occupy space, actually, the real way you relinquish power, privilege, and all of those things that embody that is the giving up of it. And the giving up of it is that nobody should know you've ever done it. It's in the same way charity works. If you do something for someone, left hand doesn't need to know what this hand is doing. And that for me is how you engage in allyship. Charity, allyship, activism, advocating, they're not distant relatives. They're relatively close. They're first cousins at very best. So these things become important. It's not. I always say it's not about somebody doing something. It's the way they do it. It's the way they do it, and it always comes back to the way they do it. Because at the end of the day, the only person you really have to look at is yourself in the mirror, and you have to be happy with how you conduct yourself. And that moral compass, that moral fibre, becomes hugely important in how you engage in these things. If you need the validation of people to tell you you've been a good ally, it's a problem. It's a big problem because you're not doing it for the right reasons. All right.
Thank you. Have we got another? Thank you.
It's all right, I've got a really loud voice anyway. I'm used to something down there and yelling up. So hopefully you can hear all right. So this is possibly going to be a difficult question. So we have Roderick here at the moment. He is our power. And so I work alongside Linda and Katie. I'm a neurodiverse human, I'm autistic, hence the bluntness. I'm also getting old, and in that way, I'm kind of like, I want to be a polite, kind human, but I've kind of got to a place as well. I'm like, okay, I need to really hurry up speaking truth to power. You know, there is an idea of inclusion. There is an idea of kind of broadening out and enjoying and experiencing other humans. Clock's ticking. So I know you had mentioned example of possibly speaking truth to a human that was maybe saying things that are difficult. But yeah, a couple more kind of concrete, this is a thing you need to hear now. That would be a really nice thing to address.
No, I appreciate it, yeah. I always think it's difficult, and it's difficult because this is my belief. That doesn't make it right, what I'm about to say, okay? Bedside manner is very important. Like, I don't like rude people. In fact, my dream is one day to have a podcast called Raisins and Rudeness, because I don't like raisins and I don't like rudeness. Those are two things I hate in equal measure, right? And so how one talks to people is important. I don't know how many meetings I would have sat in my life, but I always find it interesting how people broach subjects. So bedside manner is important, particularly when we think about the ignorant stereotypes that are associated with particular types of people. It becomes really, really important to think about delivery. And even that is not a safeguard that you won't not be seen in those ways. But it does become important because part of my thing is I don't want to make it easy for you. I don't want to make it easy for you to dismiss me and be like, well, he's just rude, or I don't want to make it easy for you. What I'm going to be is cultured. And I am going to take the time to formulate my argument, and I am going to be really articulate and really accurate, really precise. You know, I'm not going to use flowery language, but I'm going to be really accurate. And that accuracy always has people, you know, doing the dance. It always has people doing the dance. I don't know if you've seen someone get knocked out in boxing before, but before they fall to the ground, they do that, you know, because their equilibrium's completely gone. When someone's on the ropes with that, it's very difficult to counter somebody who is got that calm, rational bedside manner. There's nothing you can say. You can't go into your arsenal or your bag of tricks and say they're an angry black woman, or they're an angry woman, or they're just a really belligerent. All those tricks don't work. They don't work. So it does become important in terms of how you cultivate the message. And the reason why I say that is because, to be quite honest with you, I don't have the luxury of just shooting from the hip. I don't have that luxury. There's things that I don't like, and I have to think very carefully how I say it, because if I say it in a particular way that isn't particularly palatable, then I'm going to be positioned as an angry, aggressive black male. That's the first thing. Or somebody who's not able to contain their emotion. And actually, you know, black men are really aggressive, or black women are, you know, all of those ignorant stereotypes. And if we kind of think in the neurodivergent context, it's like, well, you know, intellectually, they got ADHD, so sometimes, and they're dyspraxic, so sometimes they mix their words, and they're autistic, they're an autist, so their disposition is that they don't like socializing, so that's why they can sometimes be socially aloof. All of these easy outs. So it does become a game and a way of being that one has to learn. And yeah, you're right, as people get older, someone said to me, as you get older, the great thing about I was asking for advice on turning 40. And they said, when you turn 40, Jason, basically you get to a stage where you don't give a anymore. So I was like, but I still do, because I can't accept getting older, so I still actually do. And it is all well and good not giving to, but, you know, as my mum always talks about, gift, cause and effect. For every action there's a reaction. You always have to think, what do you want out of a situation? What do you want out of a situation? If I understand that if I talk to people rudely, it's going to be very hard for me to get my point across. And if I definitely need them to do something, part of it also, and I think this is a big part of it, I used to work with someone who was my first kind of line manager in education, and he used to say, before I even opened my mouth, he used to say, Jason, don't give me problems, give me solutions. And one of the things that's always really useful, and it shouldn't be incumbent on us to do that, but I tell you what, having spent a lot of time around senior leaders and having been one myself, the one thing that, again, in that bag of tricks that they can come out with, they believe there's a lot of tricks. There are a lot of tricks. You know, at times you have to use some of them. There are a lot of tricks, but the one thing, if you have a solution, a viable solution that can work, it makes it very difficult to counter that with, we can't do this or we can't do that. So these things become really important. And look, is it exhausting doing this dance? 1000%. But that the act of diplomacy and the nature of engaging in these types of conversations is that's what you have to do. If I've ever come across someone who even the most privileged person who was rude and belligerent and got what they wanted, I would say is a very small number of people in life and in the higher education context more specifically. So one does have to do that, but it's about also understanding consequence. So if you do it, you know, it's like my dad always says, you always know what you can do, but you never know what someone else can do. If you do it, you have to be willing, as in Jason, me, anyone, you've got to be willing to accept, you know, as Rocky would say, to accept the hits. You've got to be willing to accept that. You've got to be willing to accept that this could backfire. But that's part of hitting free. That's part of hitting free. That's part of going, you know, tanking a first serve into the net and still going 120 miles per hour on the second serve, instead of kind of chucking in a 60 mile per hour. It's about going big all the time, and you have to have the courage of convictions. And if you can live by that, then you're fine. It's the thing you can't live with that I think is more difficult. So not saying it, the thing I can't live with is not saying it. That's the thing I can't live with. So it depends what people, you know, people have different types of bandwidths for what they can live with and what they can't. I can't live with inequality, and I don't like seeing people being treated differently. I can't stand it. So I will say it, and I will say it as articulately and as kindly as I can, but I will make that point, and forcibly as well, because one person's triumph or success is not reflective of a greater struggle, which is why I always make the point that anything that I've achieved, it means sweet FA. It means sweet FA because there are so many people who are much more deserving, who are equally as deserving, who should have the same opportunities, who haven't had those opportunities. And one individual's success is not reflective of the greater good, who should be just as successful or have the same types of rewards as I've been fortunate to have.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, we have another question here at the front. Thank you.
Thank you. And as always happens, hearing you speak has sparked 10 other questions in my head, so I'm going to try and stay focused. I'm glad you like it because that's where I'm going. And it was really sparked by the previous couple of questions. So thank you, and thank you for the talk. You talked about the struggle as someone now who's in a fairly privileged position in academia. And I guess I'm speaking with a number of hats on, someone who's worked in professional services, someone who's going to consult and deliver the programme for Advanced HE on diversifying leadership, someone who's been a tutor to neurodivergent students and as a consultant. So there's a couple of things there. I want to go back to tennis and ask you about the go, but when it comes to women, because I want to know where Serena fits in with what you're talking about. In terms of a song, and you can see here, the song that I'm thinking about is Nina Simone's Young, Gifted and Black, and I turn that into Young, Gifted, Dyslexic and Black, because the intersection that you've been referring to is something that became very apparent to me working in academia, not just for students, but also for staff as well. And that dance that they have to do, and the masking that they have to do. So my agency, amongst other things, was to start an organisation called Black Leadership and Excellence in Neurodiversity, because often there aren't many of us there working in the space, but we're not in those leadership roles. So my question for you is really around the leadership piece, in terms of what has to happen in terms of that intersection, so that we don't get caught up in the oppression Olympics, but we start this conversation talking about anti-racism. And there is still work to be done, I think, in the neurodiversity space in understanding that intersection. So I just wondered if you could just speak to that. What's the unlearning that has to happen when we look at the intersection, we're looking at neurodivergence, race, and perhaps education, and certainly the workplace? So if that's not too long.
Okay, so Serena's going to be my dessert, and I'm going to give you the main right now. Okay, so what's really interesting about leadership is my mum loves Roman mythology and Greek mythology, which is why I ended up with the name Jason. And Roman senators and leaders always had these turns of phrases. So one of them was being bred to lead, or leave those with leadership qualities, those with the breeding for it, leave it to those types of people. And I think a lot of that still resonates today. I think there is a perception that particular individuals are born to lead. And in those spaces, those individuals haven't always historically done a lot to disrupt those spaces, which is why you have the same types of leaders reproduced. It's not a coincidence that, we have the same types of leaders in those spaces. So unless you have individuals who are committed to diversity and diversifying those spaces through an intersectional lens, and that those types of leaders are few and far between, because there are other things that may draw their attention. For example, the economic stability of an institution, that might be a more prevalent issue to them, understandably, in these times, but we've not always been in economic precarity or economic turbulence. So the thing that I always think about is university senior leaders have strategic aims, and often these strategic aims are mapped across a 5-year cycle. So, the Vice-Chancellor's job, funnily enough, someone might find this hard to believe, but if people know this, if you know, it's the most precarious position, because if the governors decide you're not doing your job, that's it, you're gone, right? And so part of it is that you have these 5-year, sort of 4-year terms, and there's a mid-review, but you have these kind of terms, and part of that is in these 5-year strategic aims, you build in or you crystallize what you want the university to achieve in that time. So it might be around student engagement, improved teaching and learning, research, obviously. The one thing that seldom is never in those 5-year strategic aims is developing EDI. And the reason why I mention that is because in those 5-year strategic aims, normally you will have some sort of fiscal or human resource support put towards that. EDI in higher education relies upon intrinsic endeavour, particularly that of women of colour. If those women of colour don't engage in those processes, nothing EDI is happening in the sector. So it comes down to value. And the thing that I would always put to university senior leaders when I've spoken to them is, how much do you value EDI? How much do you value having diversity across the intersection, whether it be around race or neurodivergence or disability, etc.? How much do you value that diverse range of voices, that diverse range of perspectives? Do you recognise the penetrative effect that it could have in terms of engaging other types of people and different types of voices? And more often than not, it's a very secondary, if not, it's not something that's considered, because it's not built into those university strategic aims. So if you have that interwoven within the fabric of the university in terms of those strategic aims, it makes people, one, more accountable, because you've declared that you're going to do that, so the Board of Governors will hold you to account by that. And secondly, it's about who we breed to lead. Yeah? So it's like me being born and thinking I was born to lead. Now, I don't have that, but there are people who genuinely believe I was born to lead. This is what I'm supposed to do. And what is interesting is that you end up with the same type of person who believes that they were born to lead. And what I want to know is, actually, part of that, there's a privilege in being able to do that. So who are we outsourcing privilege to be able to have the experience? Because I think a lot of people know that they can lead, but what it always comes down to is the same thing. Am I being given the opportunity to lead? And if I'm not being given the opportunity to lead, besides me not paying the freight on the things I'm supposed to do, what are the reasons I haven't been given the opportunity to lead? And that's where that commitment to anti-racism, anti-discriminatory violences or systemic issues come into play, because it's about how we think about disrupting that and creating those spaces. And the truth is, I don't think I'm saying anything out of turn here, there are a lot of people who don't want things to change. They don't want things to change, because for something to change, you have to relinquish it. You have to, this is power. Try and take this from me. Try and prize this from my dead hands. I'm not giving it to you. Yeah, I'm giving it to all of you. But my point is that people don't want to relinquish that. They don't want to relinquish that. And that is a very sad reality. But what I'll finish on is a quote that I heard once, and I can't remember who said it, but it is something that I always try and remember. The grip you just had was a really good grip, and what it should be a physical metaphor for is that power is rarely given, it's taken. Like, you take power. You don't, there is no, dance you can do with someone, holding power by the hips or holding it by the small of the back. You just have to move it aside and take it, because the truth is that there are people who don't want to relinquish that, and they are happy for things to stay unequal and stay inequitable. And the last point on Serena is the GOAT. By number and by fact. So Serena is the GOAT. But what's always really interesting about Serena Williams, when we think about how people are thought of, is what are the kind of contexts that people think of in terms of when they think of Serena, and how much of that is mapped or influenced by racism, and particularly misogynoir towards black women. How much of it is mapped by that? So if I was to say I'd still say who's the most graceful tennis player to watch, still say it's Federer. If we're going by number and who has made the most impact in terms of how society, there's a generation of black female tennis players that all point to Serena Williams as the reason they play tennis, or Venus as the reason they play tennis. And you've got Coco Gauff, you've got Sloane Stephens, you've got obviously Heather Watson in terms of UK. Okay, so you have all of these types of people, and all of those types of people even look kind of even further to people like Arthur Ashe, who kind of laid the way for those individuals. So you have all of these types of people, and I guess you have someone like Federer, who is known for what he's done on court, and I guess some acts of philanthropy, but you have these kind of generational people who change a whole way of thinking about a group of people. And Serena Williams is, dare I say it, she's above tennis. In the same way someone like Billie Jean King is above tennis. They're not, Tracy Austin was her contemporary, but Tracy Austin isn't seen as someone that's above tennis. Billie Jean King is seen as someone who is above tennis. Serena Williams is above tennis, because what she has done transcends not just tennis, but the public sphere in terms of how people perceive black excellence, and particularly black women.
That's fantastic.
Oh, nice.
We've got one chance for one online contribution, I think Katie has one, and then we'll have to wrap up. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, we've got some comments around neurodiversity here. I'm just going to try and combine two people's contributions if I can. So we've got RX Kittens, hello, who says, I feel that as neurodivergent people, we're accused of sensitivity such as injustice sensitivity, when actually it's authenticity, and neurotypical society aren't used to it and don't like it. And hold that thought, that comment, and then coming down to the second contribution from Tessie. Jason, assuming you have come across a friend, student or colleague who you know has a lot to say to make a cultural shift, but because of their vulnerability, they're silent and mask what they're experiencing, how would you help them unlock that?
Great question. I'm going to answer that one first, and I'll come back to the first one. I might ask you the first one again. I've told this story quite a few times in various things I've done, but it's always useful telling it because it's very relevant. So there was someone that was a professional service member of staff and had a really prominent job in an institution. And they said to me, Jason, I heard you like music. So I was like, yeah, I do like music. Quite chuffed for myself in terms of saying that. And they said to me, Jason, I have to apply my makeup on twice every day. So I was like, as in I was perplexed as to why they said this to me. And they said, that song by R.E.M.? I said, yes, but you haven't mentioned the song yet. And they were like, it's called Imitation of Life. And I said, yeah, I do know that song. And they said, there's a line in it where it says, come on, no one can see me cry. I said, yep, no, I know that line very, very well. I said, well, my role is that I lead the rec submission. And so everything I do is around anti-racism. And every day I find myself talking to people about this issue and them completely rebuffing everything I do. They're not interested in engaging in this process, and they're actually really doing it from an institutional and performative point of view. And so they said, every day I go into this toilet and I cry. And my makeup gets all over the place, and then I take my small mirror and I reapply this makeup. And I always say to myself, come on, no one can see me cry. And the reason why I tell that story is because it happened, but if ever there was a metaphor for how people engage, you know, and that is a really physical one, but there are so many ways in which people have to kind of suppress what they're dealing with in terms of you're trying to provide a counter to racist endeavour or to intersectionally discriminatory behaviours, and you're always having to do this tussle, which just becomes exhausting. So often people find themselves in this fatigued, racial battle fatigue state, or they find themselves in this fatigued emotional state where they're always having to give so much of themselves to try and disrupt these problems. And in the end, they're either browbeaten or beaten in submission. So part of it is about making life. How can we all make life easier? How can we all make life easier? I think a big part of it is accepting a problem. You know, people are really, really obsessed with absolute truth. And the thing I always think is, how important is it to you to be right? And who determines who is right and who is wrong? Because every time I hear somebody engage in anti-racist endeavour, there's always an institutional pushback which will situate them as being wrong. Always. There's not one institution I've come across where someone has not felt some sort of pushback. I tell you that this is happening, and you say to me, provide statistics and provide evidence that that's happening. No, just take my word for it. These people are having a really, really bad time through no fault of their own, by just existing. Whether it be race, gender, disability, sexuality, whichever prism it will be. In the context of race, a lot of people submerge themselves. And it's that idea ideally we all want to be like this. We all want to be like this, right? And what I often see in higher education spaces, when people are doing anti-discriminatory work, is that they're like this. They're made to be small. They're made to be small, and they can only ever talk from this small place here. Can only ever talk from that small place and be small, and they're expected to stay small. And should they ever rise up, there's always someone to put them back in the corner and remind them that you don't belong here and this is where you should be. You should be until we decide you're allowed to do that. And that becomes a really, really difficult thing, because for a lot of people, that's what they experience. So it's about creating a culture where actually people don't have to be small. I think, what's the line in Dirty Dancing? Like something about baby in the corner, can't remember. Like, yeah, nobody puts baby in the corner, okay? And that's kind of how we should all be thinking. Nobody should put any babies, let alone baby in Dirty Dancing. No one should put any babies in the corner. Everybody should be able to hold court and hold space. And that is a cultural thing, you know, and to do that, you can't strategize culture. Culture is a feet first thing. You go in feet first with culture. So feet first, head second. Head second is that strategy. Your head is your strategy. But you cannot have a good culture, you cannot have a good strategy without a good culture. And to do that, you have to provide opportunities for people to speak truth to power. And then the first question was, sensitivities. Sensitivities, yeah. So that's just laziness. That's just laziness. Someone highlights that I am struggling with something because I'm neurodivergent. And it's like, well, it's just depression, and it's laziness to do that. It's laziness. And the reason I say that is because there's this feeling now that you can see what's happening now. You can kind of see, like, it's like with DEI, like, these things become franchised by in terms of general parlance and general discourses, and then they become trivialized. So the trivialization that's happening with neurodivergence at the moment is that everybody's neurodivergent. Because now we have a language for it. Temple Grandin had the language for it 10, 15 years ago, and now everyone's neurodivergent. No, actually, when you have someone who is 50 years old, for example, and didn't have a proxy for understanding why they felt they were different from other people, and now they have that thing that explains to them, okay, this is why I am. Now I have an understanding for that. That's not to be trivialised. That is a life-affirming thing for a lot of people. So the idea that people can trivialise that, it only speaks to their ignorance and their unkindness. And the best thing you can do, as my mum always says, is that when people least deserve kindness and forgiveness, that's the time you should most show it to them. So when these people engage in these acts of kind of dismissing these things or being kind of really, I guess, disrespectful and uncouth about these things, the best thing you can do is to show them kindness. That is the best thing you can do, because kindness in of itself is an education, and getting them to understand that is very, very important. And the thing is, if I give you, or if someone gives me the gift of education, the great thing about free will is that I can choose what I want to do with it. And if those individuals choose, once they get given that gift in terms of understanding what neurodivergence is, to kind of be like, well, I don't want it, then fine. Energy goes where energy flows. You've given the gift of education to someone else, and they've chosen not to do it, they've chosen not to engage or partake in that education, you move on. And you say, you have a good life, kiss them on both cheeks, and you get on with your way. But you've done your public act, your public duty, which was to provide someone with a gift. You know, play it forward. The play it forward bit is, these are the reasons why people engage in discussions around neurodiversity. These are the things that liberate, in terms of a liberatory society and the kind of liberation we all long to have and the kind of egalitarian ideals that we value. This is why it's important to have these discussions. If you don't understand that, you have free will to do what you want. But I am going to be as I am, and I'm going to reside in this space whether you like it or not. So it's probably better for you that you become part of this, because you don't know who might be in close proximity to you, who may be, in this case, neurodivergent. And what you're going to say to them if they turn around to you and say, I have ADHD, or I have Tourette's, or I'm autistic, or I'm dyslexic. What are you going to say? You're going to say, you're making it up, or come on, don't be silly. What are you going to say? Because that person could be your son, your daughter, your child, it could be anyone. And it's important to have that empathy. You know, the thing we lack is empathy, and that lack of empathy is what makes us dismissive of other people's plights. But in doing that, you don't know how life will turn out, and you could find yourself in that situation. It's the same thing I always think about with homelessness. When people look at people who have experienced unfortunate times, they make the assumption that the individual may have made a set of bad decisions, but we're only 3 months, all of us, from being in that same situation. So you don't know what things people might experience, and having that empathy goes a long way, because when you find yourself, you know, touch wood you don't, you know, but if you did, the empathy that you've shown other people is the same empathy, if you believe in karma, that you will face when you find yourself in that situation. So that politics of care that we speak about, that importance of love and that importance of compassion becomes hugely important, you know, and when people least deserve it, that's when you should show it to them even more. That's when you should show it to them even more, because when people talk like that, what it demonstrates to me is that they're not in receipt of compassion and love and forgiveness. They're not in receipt of it. They're not in receipt of understanding possibly themselves, and that kind of dismissiveness. They're not in receipt of that. So if you're not in receipt of it, I'll even if you hate me, I will still kiss you on the lips and make you a part of something. So, and that's really important. That's really important, because I think where we find ourselves now, if you take two people and they both bring a gun to a fight, like, I'm not sure what it will achieve when both of them are going to end up dead. I think it's really, really important where you're met with, you know, this rearguard action of just absolute abhorrent behaviour. You can make sure, it's that kind of classic Michelle Obama line, when they go low, you try and go high. And it's easier said than done, but it's a really, really important thing, because your integrity and your dignity is all you have. And if you're willing to compromise that, you only really reduce yourself to the individual who has those same thoughts. So sorry for the ramble, but it is really important, because I don't want to gloss over neurodiversity, but the way people are talking about it now is becoming really, really problematic, and it's not helpful to the cause, because what they're doing is trivializing people's experiences, and I don't agree with that.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you everyone who's here today and everyone online for sharing, for unlearning, and for being part of this experience today. Please join me in thanking Jason for his wonderful keynote. First of all, public engagement. Jennifer Kim, who's here in the audience, who's done an amazing amount of work, and Laura, who is online and doing a fantastic job there too. We've also been helped by various teams throughout the university, media services, who are here with the live stream today, our staff inclusivity networks, particularly our disabled staff network, who helped us in the co-creation of this, and also our race and ethnic equality network as well. So thank you to them. Thank you to ARU's communications team, our students' union, who've really got the word out, which has been fantastic. Also the project teams, I've got headed up by Katie Potts, who's the head of diversity and cultural change, is here today. Hannah, who's actually stepped out to help with the catering. Also our colleague Camilla, who's moved on to pastures new, so we hope you're watching, Camilla. Also Tyra and Alvina and everybody else, Linda, who's helped today. And thank you also to the Vice Chancellor and the Deputy Vice Chancellor for attending, for opening, and also supporting this really important work at ARU. And finally, let's really thank ARU's own honorary doctorate, Jason Arday. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Just wanted to say one last thing, everyone. It's not lost on me that everyone's taken the time to be here today, so just thank you so much. Jen, Katie, Linda, Nolima, just thank you so much for everything. And honestly, I always do everything as though it's the last time. So if this is the last time, which obviously I hope it's not, but if it is, the most important thing is that you always have a good thing to go out on. So just thank you so much for everything. I really appreciate all of you. And honestly, I cannot emphasize how much work Nalima's done to put this whole show on. So if you could just give her the biggest round of applause, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you. And KP and Linda, I just love you both so much. And I really can't thank you enough for everything you've done for me. Roderick, thank you so much. And Jen, you've been amazing. And she's got the best background. Anyone who's ever had a meeting with Jen, if they've seen her wallpaper, good wallpaper, is a flowery background. So anyway, we'll finish on that one. And everyone have a really good Easter when it comes around, okay? Take care, everyone, and God bless. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone. For everybody who's here, we've got some lovely catering. I'm sorry I haven't got that for online people, but if you can fill in the feedback form, we really appreciate your feedback. We iterate, we take on board your comments, and even just if you've enjoyed the event, if you found it insightful, that pocket of care, that hope, that inspiration that Jason's brought, please fill in our feedback form. It won't take long. And you can also check out our web pages. So we've got an Unlearn series, which you can look at on Anglia Ruskin University's web pages. And we're just really delighted to have you all with us here today. So thank you very much.